The mind is a double-edged sword. It can be the greatest ally or the most dangerous enemy. It operates on a simple principle: acceptance and rejection. It moves toward pleasure and away from pain. This is why people naturally seek comfort, happiness, and fulfillment, yet often end up confused, restless, or dissatisfied. The Bhagavad Gita explains that without proper self-awareness and discipline, the mind becomes fickle, unpredictable, and easily influenced by emotions, external circumstances, and desires. Most people believe they are making rational choices, but in reality, their minds are simply reacting to pleasure and pain. A person might chase relationships, material wealth, or success, thinking these things will bring happiness, but once achieved, they realize the fulfillment is temporary. Why? Because the mind constantly shifts its definition of happiness. What was once exciting quickly becomes ordinary, and the cycle of craving begins again. This is why Krishna tells Arjuna that true wisdom comes from detachment, not from suppressing desires, but from understanding that external things can never provide lasting happiness. The greatest paradox of the mind is that it is never truly satisfied. One moment, it wants one thing, and the next, it desires something completely different. It is like a storm, constantly shifting direction, making it unreliable for decision-making unless trained properly. This is why the Bhagavad Gita emphasizes meditation, self-discipline, and spiritual knowledge, not as religious dogma, but as tools to stabilize the mind, so it serves rather than controls you. The difference between a peaceful person and a restless one is not their circumstances, but their mastery over the mind. A person who lacks control over their mind lives in a state of constant impulsivity, making decisions based on short-term pleasure rather than long-term wisdom. This is why so many people struggle with procrastination, addiction, and emotional instability, because they have never learned how to govern their thoughts and desires. The mind is not meant to be the master. It is meant to be a tool, directed by intelligence and higher awareness. Without proper guidance, it becomes a prisoner of emotions and impulses, leading to endless frustration. So, what is the solution? The first step is understanding that pleasure is an illusion, and true happiness comes from stability and inner peace. The Bhagavad Gita makes it clear: happiness that depends on external circumstances is temporary, but happiness that comes from within is eternal. But if pleasure is an illusion, why do people chase it? Why does the mind convince us that happiness comes from satisfying desires, when in reality, it only leads to more craving? That's what we'll explore next. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Pleasure and the Pursuit of Happiness. The mind is a master of deception, constantly convincing people that happiness lies in fulfilling desires. But here's the catch: no desire, once fulfilled, ever truly satisfies. The moment one goal is achieved, another takes its place. A person who dreams of making more money thinks, if I reach this financial level, I'll be happy. But once they get there, the satisfaction fades, and a new target emerges. This is why Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that chasing external pleasure is like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that happiness depends on external circumstances. They think that a better job, a new relationship, or material success will bring lasting joy. But if this were true, why do so many people who have everything still feel empty? The truth is, happiness is not what happens to you. It's what happens within you. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that real happiness is not found in chasing pleasure, but in inner peace, self-mastery, and detachment from fleeting desires. Another illusion created by the mind is that pain is something to be avoided at all costs. People resist discomfort, hardship, or emotional struggles, forgetting that growth only happens through challenge. The greatest warriors, thinkers, and leaders in history did not become who they were by seeking comfort. They became great because they embraced difficulty, using it as a tool for transformation. Krishna reminds Arjuna that happiness and suffering are two sides of the same coin, and only those who see beyond them achieve true wisdom. It's also important to recognize that external events, by themselves, have no inherent power to bring happiness or sadness. A rainy day might ruin one person's mood, but bring another person peace and joy. The event is neutral. It is the mind's interpretation that creates emotional reactions. This is why self-awareness and mindfulness are crucial, because the way we experience life is based less on what happens and more on how we process it. Krishna teaches that by mastering the mind, one becomes immune to the constant ups and downs of external circumstances. So, if pleasure is an illusion and happiness is an inside job, how does one actually control the mind? How does a person stop being ruled by desires, fears, and impulsive emotions? Krishna gives Arjuna a clear answer. Discipline, detachment, and spiritual practice are the only ways to master the mind and find real peace. But how does one apply this in everyday life? That's what we'll explore next. How the Bhagavad Gita provides a step-by-step process for controlling the mind and freeing oneself from illusion. Chapter 2. The Bhagavad Gita's perspective on controlling the mind. Krishna tells Arjuna that the mind can be either one's greatest friend or one's worst enemy. If properly controlled, it leads to clarity, peace, and self-realization. But if left unchecked, it becomes a restless force that drags a person into confusion, emotional instability, and suffering. The problem is that most people let the mind control them, rather than mastering it. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that self-discipline, meditation, and detachment are the keys to breaking free from this cycle and gaining control over one's thoughts, desires, and emotions. A restless mind is like a fire that can never be satisfied. The more it is fed with desires, the more it craves. Modern society fuels this fire, constantly pushing new distractions, new desires, new forms of entertainment that keep people trapped in a state of impulsivity and dissatisfaction. Krishna warns Arjuna that indulging the mind's every desire does not bring peace. It brings addiction and suffering. Instead, he advises regulation, acting with purpose rather than being a slave to impulses. True freedom is not doing whatever one desires, but having the power to choose one's actions with wisdom. One of the most powerful lessons in the Bhagavad Gita is the practice of detachment. Detachment does not mean giving up on life or suppressing emotions. It means remaining centered and unaffected by external circumstances. A person who is detached still enjoys life, but does not become enslaved by pleasure or destroyed by pain. Krishna describes a wise person as one who treats success and failure, pleasure and pain, praise and criticism with the same steady mind. This is not indifference. It is mastery over the emotional fluctuations that control most people's lives. But how does one achieve this level of control? Krishna advises consistent spiritual practice, discipline, and self-reflection. Meditation is one of the most effective tools because it trains the mind to be silent, focused, and free from distractions. Without discipline, the mind becomes like a wild horse, running in every direction, exhausting itself without ever reaching a destination. But with proper guidance, it becomes a powerful tool for clarity, wisdom, and self-mastery. The difference between a person who is constantly anxious and one who is at peace is not their circumstances, but their ability to control their own mind. And this brings us to a fascinating analogy: the restless mind as a genie. Just like a genie, the mind is always active, always seeking, always moving. If not given the right direction, it creates chaos, confusion, and endless desires. But if properly trained, it becomes one's greatest servant, working for personal growth and spiritual evolution. But how exactly does one direct this energy correctly? That's what we'll explore next. Chapter 3. The Genie Analogy. The mind is a constantly active force. The mind never stops working. It is like a genie, constantly generating thoughts, desires, and emotions. If not given proper direction, it will create chaos, attachment, and suffering. But if trained and guided, It can become a powerful servant that helps one achieve clarity, wisdom, and inner peace. The Bhagavad Gita emphasizes that a person who does not control their mind is like a ship without a captain, drifting aimlessly at the mercy of the waves of life. The challenge, then, is learning to direct the mind rather than being controlled by it. Imagine someone who wakes up in the morning and immediately checks their phone, gets lost in social media, and jumps from one distraction to another. Their mind is like an unleashed genie, creating one craving after another, scrolling, consuming, reacting, but never actually progressing. Now compare this to someone who starts the day with meditation, conscious breathing, and clear priorities. Their mind is trained, like a disciplined servant, working in their favor rather than against them. Krishna explains to Arjuna that without control, the mind multiplies desires endlessly, making a person restless, anxious, and emotionally weak. This is why self-discipline is essential, not as a restriction, but as a tool for freedom. Just as an athlete trains their body, a person must train their mind to focus, to resist impulsivity, and to act with intention rather than reaction. Without this, the mind will constantly jump from one thought to another, one craving to another, one worry to another, never allowing a person to experience true peace. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that happiness is not about fulfilling desires. It is about mastering the desires themselves. Meditation and spiritual practice act as the anchor that keeps the restless mind grounded. Without something to hold on to, the mind will always be seeking, wandering, and chasing illusions. Krishna teaches that the mind is like the wind, powerful but uncontrollable unless guided by intelligence. This is why daily practices like meditation, scripture study, and mindful reflection are not just beneficial, but necessary. They provide the pole that keeps the genie engaged, ensuring that its energy is directed towards something meaningful rather than wasted on distractions. Ultimately, a person has only two choices: become the master of the mind, or remain its servant. If not properly engaged, the mind will create doubts, attachments, and endless desires. But if trained, it becomes a force of wisdom, creativity, and spiritual strength. And this leads us to an even deeper question. What role does intelligence play in this process? How does one strengthen their intelligence to keep the mind under control? That's what we'll explore next. Chapter 4. The role of intelligence in governing the mind. The Bhagavad Gita explains that the mind is meant to be controlled by intelligence, not the other way around. When intelligence is strong, it directs the mind toward discipline, wisdom, and higher purpose. But when intelligence is weak, the mind wanders aimlessly, chasing desires, reacting impulsively, and getting trapped in emotional turbulence. Krishna tells Arjuna that just as a charioteer must control the horses to reach the destination, intelligence must control the mind to attain self-realization. Without this guidance, the mind pulls a person in every direction, wasting energy on temporary pleasures and illusions. The problem is that most people let their minds dictate their actions instead of using intelligence to evaluate decisions. Imagine someone who eats junk food every day because their mind craves it, even though their intelligence knows it's unhealthy. Or someone who stays in a toxic relationship because they are emotionally attached, even when they know it's harmful. This is the struggle of mind versus intelligence, the battle between immediate pleasure and long-term well-being. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that strengthening intelligence is the key to overcoming impulsivity and making decisions based on wisdom, not fleeting emotions. But how does one strengthen intelligence? The Bhagavad Gita gives a clear answer: scriptural study, reflection, and conscious action. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body, spiritual knowledge strengthens intelligence, allowing it to govern the mind effectively. By regularly engaging with timeless wisdom, whether through the Bhagavad Gita, philosophy, or deep self-inquiry, a person builds a strong moral foundation, making it easier to resist temptations, detach from lower desires, and stay aligned with higher principles. Another key factor in intelligence is detachment, the ability to observe the mind's desires without blindly following them. Krishna explains that a wise person is one who does not let emotions dictate actions, but instead evaluates situations with clarity and patience. This is why meditation, self-discipline, and mindfulness are essential. They help intelligence stay in control rather than being drowned by the mind's endless cravings. The stronger the intelligence, the easier it becomes to act with purpose rather than react impulsively. So, intelligence is the charioteer, guiding the restless mind towards spiritual growth and self-mastery. But what happens when intelligence is weak? The mind takes control, leading a person toward distraction, instability, and suffering. The Bhagavad Gita compares a strong mind to an ocean, vast, deep, and undisturbed by the waves of external events. But how does one cultivate this ocean-like stability, ensuring that the mind remains centered no matter what happens? That's what we'll explore next. Chapter 5, Becoming Like the Ocean, Anchoring the Mind in Higher Knowledge. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna compares a steady and enlightened mind to an ocean, vast, deep, and unaffected by the endless waves of desires, emotions, and external events. Just as the ocean remains calm despite the rivers flowing into it, a person who is anchored in higher knowledge and self-awareness is not disturbed by the ups and downs of life. The key to achieving this ocean-like stability is anchoring the mind in spiritual wisdom, discipline, and detachment. Most people, however, are like small ponds, easily disturbed by the slightest drop of water. A single negative comment, an unexpected failure, or an unmet desire can shake their emotions, break their confidence, and disrupt their peace. This happens because their happiness is based on external conditions rather than inner stability. But Krishna teaches Arjuna that true peace does not come from controlling the outside world. It comes from mastering one's inner world. When the mind is anchored in dharma, wisdom, and higher knowledge, nothing can shake it. One of the most effective ways to cultivate this unshakable mental strength is by deeply engaging with sacred teachings. The more one immerses themselves in the Bhagavad Gita, spiritual philosophy, and self-inquiry, the more their mind is trained to see beyond temporary disturbances. Instead of reacting emotionally to every situation, they develop the vision to see life's events as part of a greater spiritual journey. Just like an ocean, they remain still and composed, no matter how strong the waves become. Another essential practice is detachment, not from life itself, but from excessive emotional investment in things beyond one's control. Krishna advises Arjuna to perform his duties with full dedication, but without attachment to the results. This is the secret to peace, acting with purpose while remaining detached from outcomes. A person anchored in this mindset is immune to anxiety, fear, and disappointment, because they understand that external success and failure are just passing waves. They do not define the ocean itself. So, becoming like the ocean means developing emotional stability, mastering detachment, and anchoring the mind in transcendental wisdom. This state of equanimity allows a person to face any situation, success, failure, praise, criticism, with the same steady mind. But how does this relate to happiness? Can a disciplined life really bring more joy than the constant pursuit of pleasure? That's exactly what we'll explore next. Chapter 6, The Science of Happiness and the Benefits of Discipline. Most people believe that happiness comes from doing whatever they want, whenever they want. But paradoxically, this approach leads to frustration, emptiness, and restlessness. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that true happiness is not found in unrestricted pleasure, but in self-discipline, mastery over desires, and alignment with Dharma. Modern psychology agrees. Studies show that people who practice self-control and long-term thinking report greater life satisfaction than those who chase instant gratification. The reason for this is simple. Pleasure and happiness are not the same thing. Pleasure is short-lived, external, and dependent on circumstances, like eating junk food, binge-watching TV, or chasing material success. Happiness, on the other hand, is internal, sustainable, and comes from living with purpose. Krishna explains to Arjuna that pleasures of the senses are temporary and ultimately lead to suffering, while inner fulfillment comes from self-awareness and detachment. The more a person chases pleasure, the less happy they become, because pleasure fades, but desire remains. Hedonism, the philosophy that maximizing pleasure leads to happiness, has been repeatedly disproven. In reality, people who focus only on pleasure-seeking without discipline often feel more anxious, distracted, and dissatisfied. Why? Because the mind becomes addicted to stimulation, making it impossible to find peace and stillness. This is why Krishna advises self-restraint, meditation, and mindful action, not as a punishment, but as a way to free oneself from emotional instability and impulsive desires. The real secret to lasting happiness is living by structured principles rather than impulses. Imagine two people, one who wakes up late, spends the day distracted, follows every craving, and constantly seeks entertainment. The other wakes up early, follows a morning routine, exercises self-control, and dedicates time to meditation and learning. Who will be more fulfilled? The second person, without a doubt. The Bhagavad Gita explains that discipline is not about restriction. It is about cultivating a life that brings true peace and satisfaction. So, if happiness is a result of discipline rather than pleasure-seeking, what is the ultimate goal? The Bhagavad Gita teaches that the body and mind are temporary, but the soul is eternal. Understanding this is the key to breaking free from illusions and achieving real self-realization. But how does one actually shift from identifying as the body and mind to recognizing themselves as an Atma, soul? That's what we'll explore next. Chapter 7. The Soul's Journey and the Importance of Spiritual Awareness. The Bhagavad Gita makes one thing clear. You are not the body, you are the soul, Atma. The body is temporary, changing with time, but the soul is eternal, indestructible, and beyond material limitations. Yet, most people live as if they are nothing more than their physical form, emotions, and thoughts, forgetting that their true essence is spiritual. This illusion is what keeps the mind restless. It constantly seeks happiness in external things, rather than realizing that true fulfillment comes from within. Krishna tells Arjuna that just as a person discards old clothes and wears new ones, the soul changes bodies from one life to another. But if one identifies only with the temporary body and mind, they remain trapped in cycles of karma, pleasure-seeking, and suffering. This is why spiritual awareness is essential. It allows a person to see beyond temporary desires and recognize their higher purpose. The soul's journey is not about chasing material success, but about evolving towards self-realization, wisdom, and inner peace. Many people live in constant anxiety because they believe that their worth is tied to achievements, possessions, or relationships. But Krishna explains that real strength comes from detachment, not from rejecting life, but from understanding that nothing external defines who you truly are. A person who realizes they are the soul, not the body, no longer fears failure, loss, or change. They act with purpose, perform their duties, and engage with the world, but without attachment, without being consumed by emotions and desires. So how does one develop this spiritual awareness? Krishna advises meditation, self-inquiry, and studying sacred knowledge. By reflecting on one's true nature, practicing mindfulness, and detaching from fleeting emotions, a person awakens their higher consciousness. The more one understands the eternal nature of the soul, the less they are affected by life's temporary ups and downs. Just like an ocean remains still despite waves crashing on its surface, a person anchored in spiritual wisdom remains peaceful even in turbulent times. Ultimately, life is not about escaping the world, but about seeing it with clarity. When one realizes that they are the soul, beyond time and space, they break free from illusion, fear, and suffering. The Bhagavad Gita offers this path, not as a theory, but as a practical guide to living with wisdom, purpose, and inner strength. And this is the ultimate game of the mind, to rise beyond temporary distractions and awaken to the eternal truth of the self. Conclusion: are you controlling your mind or being controlled? Now that you understand how the mind plays tricks, creates illusions, and fuels endless desires, the question is, are you going to take control, or will you continue being played? The Bhagavad Gita makes it clear, the mind is either your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how you train it. If you let it run wild, it will lead you into impulsivity, regret, and suffering. But if you discipline it, master it, and anchor it in higher wisdom, it becomes a powerful tool for clarity, peace, and self-realization. Look around. Most people are prisoners of their own thoughts and emotions. They react rather than act. They chase pleasure rather than fulfillment. They follow impulses rather than purpose. But you don't have to be like them. You have the power to break free. The key: awareness, self-discipline, and aligning your mind with intelligence rather than emotions. The more you train your mind, the more unshakable you become, like an ocean, undisturbed by the waves of life. But mastering the mind isn't just about theory. It requires action. So, I want to challenge you. What's one way your mind has been controlling you lately? Have you been chasing distractions, making emotional decisions, or falling into the trap of impulsive desires? Drop a comment below and share your experience. The first step to mastery is awareness, and discussing it openly is a powerful way to solidify your learning. Remember, if you don't control your mind, the world will do it for you. But you're here, learning, growing, and taking the first steps toward true mental mastery. If you want to keep diving into the hidden wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita and practical ways to apply it, subscribe and turn on notifications. This journey has only just begun. The game of the mind is real. The only question is, are you ready to start playing it the right way?